Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Go from the beginning. This time we'll talk functions. You've already seen what a function can look like. In fact, you've seen the entry point function, the func main. You could also be defining your own functions. So here we have an example of an add function. Now what's interesting about this add function is that it has parameters, values that you can send to the function so it can do something with it. Let's simplify this a little bit, and let's not start on the hardest level first, but do this. So here we're turning it into a log function, and we'll do like so. Gonna do println log, and also import fmt because we're gonna use the fmt library. Now we have defined the function. We have the func keyword, we have the name of the function, open and closing parentheses, and open and closing curly brace. So here we're also doing or creating a statement within the log function. What we want to do is to run what we have so far. Okay, friends, now we have a package main, we have an import fmt, we have a log function. And we can see that it doesn't do much. And why is that? Well, we are not actually invoking the log function. So let's do that next. And now we can see how log is being printed out. This isn't really useful, right? Because what we want to do is to send a parameter. We don't want a log statement at all times. We want a way of sending some variable through message. Now, message should come into the function somehow. What we can do is this. Send message as a string, but now our invocation is complaining because it needs us to type something. Now you can see how our function is able to take that parameter, the message string, and we see how log in main is being printed out. And yeah, log functions like these can be really useful, especially when it comes to debugging. If something goes wrong, you want an easy way to print out exactly where you are in the code so you understand where the code broke, for example. So now we have introduced parameters. We have also introduced a parameter type. Now, you remember how I showed you the add function initially? We're going to take that back, or rather add it. So important to think about when it comes to an add function is that we need two values, first and second, and we need a way to return those. Now it complains. It's saying too many return values. So it's actually saying to us, I don't know what you mean. This function isn't actually returning something, and how does it know? Well, it's here. Right after the function definition, right after the parentheses, you need to put a return type. And the return type you should put depends on what you do here. In our case, we take two integers and produce a new integer, so therefore it should be double. So func add, we're not calling it, but we could. 1 and 2. And let's also put a print line statement in front of this so that we see the end result. We're doing something wrong. Let's see here. Yes, we lost our add. So let's fix that. Now let's go. Okay, great. So now we can see that we have an add function. That's all great. But we also want to make sure that we can support other types of functions. So let's support a divide. Now, when you divide two numbers, you get fractions, right? So the way to handle that is to instead deal with floats. So once we deal with floats, of course, if we take two floats, try to do something with them, the end result is not going to be an integer, but rather a float. So if we were to call that, 1 divided by 2 isn't going to give us much, so let's take something that we produces something interesting. And now we get the response 2. So that's kind of good to know and see. Now let's show you how you can do something called a named return. What that means is we can actually do this. So we can name the parameter. And by naming the parameter like so, you can define an assignment like we do here, but now we don't need to have what's going on here. We don't need to have it here. So this row here, this return is completely empty, and all we have is our quote, which is being assigned a value, and this will still work. So yeah, if you want a way to deal with this return value, you must set it as part of the function. If we don't, it's going to be mad at us. I can show you that. Well, technically it's not screaming at us, but you can see that the end result is not what you expect. It's going to return the default value of whatever a float returns. So yeah, make sure if you're using these kind of constructions with a named return, make sure that you assign it properly so your function works as intended. I also want to show you how you can have multiple return values. So here you have sum int and product int. You can see how we are returning sum and product. So now we're doing two different things. So multiple calculations. In my opinion, a function should do one thing, but it's kind of nice to know that this does exist. So here we are assigning sum by first and second, and first and second is also used to multiply two values. Now the difference here is this. If I were to call calc with 4 and 2, no, 4 and 4, I would, if I were to add the two together, I would get 8, and the product would be 16. Now, because I get two values, I need a way to assign those. I would need to do something like that, but I'm getting two values, like so. So this is my way of actually ensuring that these two values that we produce with the calc function has somewhere to go. And now we can do this. Instead of calling divide, we are calling sum and product. And now you can see that we are getting 8 and 16 back. So if you have those cases where you need to return multiple return values, you can just, within the parens, you can just define those with a comma in between. And before we end this video, let's just quickly look at what we were doing. We started off with our log function. A log function had a parameter. The parameter had a type, that's important. And we were able to make it quite flexible. And yeah, we should probably move all of these invocations here. We want to keep that. Everything else here should go into the main. I'm not sure why I typed into main, but I did. Right, so now this log function is a bit more clean, but my point is still valid. If you look at the println, it starts off with some generic prefix. You can name this whatever you want. Could be a datetime, for example. That's very common in log functions. The point is, mix what is static with that is dynamic, and the dynamic part is what you send in here. So this could say anything. This makes your log function flexible. And yeah, we also looked at an add function. We looked at using two integers. This is two parameters with type int. You also saw how we added a return type. The return type needs to match whatever is going on here. And we also looked at a different way of doing this with a named return value. Here we named quote. And when we did that, we could have an empty return on its own row. That's perfectly fine. And lastly, we look at a calc function. Now we had multiple named return values. The only thing we need to ensure for our function to work properly is to ensure we set those number. And a little gotcha here, when we're looking at invoking calc, we saw that if we wanted to get both these values, we needed to have sum, comma, product. But if we want to ignore product, we can do like so. So the underscore is a way for us to say we don't care about the response. Entirely up to you how you want to deal with that, if you actually care about sum and product or just one of the two. Hopefully, by watching this video, you now feel like, hey, I know how to create a function, I know how to invoke it, I know how to work with parameters, return types, and also this little nifty construct here with named return values. So yeah, looking forward to see what you are going to create.